When I first started at Ruthmere, I noticed the drawing by Charles Dana Gibson in the butler's pantry. And it kind of intrigued me because it didn't seem like it quite fit in with a lot of the other art at Ruthmere. So I wanted to find out more about it and immediately got online and found this book, The Gibson Girl and Her America, which kind of got me started, you know, and I learned a little bit more about him. And I had mentioned a couple of times that I'd like to do a gallery talk, and people weren't very excited other than Mark. And Mark is the one, so if I'm really bad, Mark is the one that you can blame because he talked me into forging ahead and doing it. I'd also heard about the Gibson Girl, but you know, I didn't understand her significance either. So the more I learned, the more intrigued I became. And I found out that finding information about the artist was a real challenge. That, you know, there were things online about the Gibson Girl and a few things about him, but they were just kind of paragraphs. And one of the statements said, one source said that he was the most significant artist of his time, but nobody knows anything about him. And I'm going, swell, I picked a great topic. The few sources I did find kept quoting this book, The Portrait of an Era, which is a biography of him, but it was written when he was still alive. And the author starts at the beginning about saying what a challenge it is to write a biography about a living person. But that ended up being a good thing because it's more of an autobiography. He had input from him, his family, and so forth. And so then I started a quest to find the book. And that was equally disappointing because Elkhart Public Library had one at one point. I tried the Goshen Public Library. They had one at one point. They referred it to the Elkhart Public Library. I tried Notre Dame Library, but apparently it's harder to borrow books from Notre Dame than it used to be. So finally I got on Amazon and I found I could have gotten a first edition for $175. And I love Ruthmere, but not that much. And so I found a $15 used copy and ordered it on eBay.
I'm just curious, I hate to interrupt, but wouldn't they be able to get one through the Indiana Library?
Theoretically, but I wanted something that I could have for a long time and, you know, wouldn't be subject. And when I found the $15 version, I thought, yes, it's the Holy Grail. I remember talking to some friends saying, it came, you know, and all of a sudden I had more than enough information. And he really was a fascinating person with a fascinating background. And you have to put his life in context with what was happening at the time. You know, he was born in 1867. The Civil War had ended in 1865. So this is pre-Civil War America. He was born in 1867 to, and this is in quotes, a happy family of modest means. His father was a Civil War lieutenant, his mother, again in quotes, lively and warm-hearted young woman. He had an older brother and 3 younger sisters. Both parents had a long line of New England ancestors. They were both, so they were, you know, they were New England people that, even though they didn't have a lot of money, commanded a certain amount of respect. He was born near Boston. His great-grandfather was a painter of miniatures in Boston, and his father liked to draw kind of in an amateur way, and he ended up being a traveling salesman. So when he would write home, he would illustrate his letters with pictures of things that he saw. When Charles was 5, he was confined to bed for an illness. His father entertained him by cutting silhouettes out of paper of different animals. And before long, he had this whole kind of circus, you know, around his bed. He got kind of bored with that and so demanded the scissors. And he learned to make silhouettes himself. And he kept working and working on it until he got better and better. And if you look at the handout, up in this corner is a copy or a picture of one of his silhouettes. when he was 12 years old, he started, he was able to sell silhouettes. And that's kind of a funny story too. He was always aware that his family needed money, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. And so he and his older brother decided that his silhouettes would sell. So they started out, they snuck out of the house one morning, went down the street to a friend's house, and sat on her front porch at like 5:30 in the morning, hoping that there would generate a crowd. And he learned the first, lesson of marketing. There was nobody up at 5:30 in the morning, other than the milkman who ended up buying a silhouette. So he did that from time to time. As a child, he'd illustrate history exams at school, and he would also entertain his little sisters by illustrating stories when he read them. He was discovered by a sculptor named Augustus Saint-Gaudens, and he apprenticed with him for a while, but he decided that his talent wasn't in sculpture, that it did not end well. So at this point, his parents were living in Flushing, New York, and Flushing was populated by a combination of the new middle class, the people that had made money during the war, and displaced members of the upper class. And it was kind of an interesting, kind of blend. So he learned how the upper class behaved. He participated in their activities. He was a good athlete, so he learned he was on a rowing team and so forth, and all of the things that they enjoyed. When he got to the point where he was in high school, his parents realized they couldn't afford to send him to art school, but they had started an organization called the Art Students League in New York City. And that was kind of a startup. It was kind of avant-garde. It was kind of something that was kind of different than traditional art schools. And it was a very well-regarded program. Frederick Remington, Frederick Remington was one of his classmates. And it was a place where you went and, they worked with you, and when they felt you were ready, you kind of went out into the world and sold your stuff. So after 2 years, he was encouraged by the success that a lot of his colleagues or the other students were having. He started showing his portfolio to gallery owners and art editors, and his drawings were pretty primitive, and he didn't get much success. And so the other kind of significant thing on this handout is the moon and I. That was the very first drawing that he sold. And he decided that he'd had so much negative feedback that when he tried to sell this, if it didn't sell, he was going to quit. And it just so happened he dropped his portfolio off at Life magazine, went back a couple days later, and the editor of Life magazine bought it. He bought it, I think, for $4. Later, he said that he thought the drawing was reasonably bad, but he felt that it showed promise. And he felt that Gibson was the type of artist he wanted to encourage. He was known to encourage artists. And Life magazine at that point was kind of a combination of humor and hard-hitting news. And so this kind of, appealed to the humor side. The caption on that, and I didn't have room, was, pray no mistake, we are not shy, we're very wide awake, the moon and I. He didn't sign it. It was a reference to the Mikado, which was very popular in New York at the time. And he had him fine-tune it a couple of times and just kept encouraging him. And the next one, the drawing of the two men at the table, as an example of how we improved. At this point, he was pretty much self-taught. He just kept looking at other, examples of artists and illustrators, and just kept fine-tuning it and going back and getting better and better. He sold a second drawing to Life magazine, and that's when he began to get confidence. He started signing his work then. Everything was unsigned before that. After a few more commissions, he opened a studio, and he began making regular contributions to a rival magazine called Tidbits. Tidbits later became Time magazine. And by 1890, he was earning from $600 to $800 a month. $300 a month from Life, which is about $25,000 a month in today's money. So he was doing well. He continued to study the work of other American and European artists, and eventually developed a style of his own. And he began making drawings that poked fun at social norms. And the other one down at the bottom is tennis was just gaining popularity at that time. And that was a sport that women of that age who had just kind of discovered sports could play. And the caption on that is, tennis is such a refined and pretty game, especially played in these early spring days. And the characters in it are all covered with mud. But it was acceptable, and it kind of sold the new lifestyle. Tidbits was a staunchly Republican publication. Gibson didn't care much about politics, but he drew what he was instructed to draw by the editor. And after a couple of embarrassing encounters with victims of his illustrations at social gatherings, he avoided drawing acidly political cartoons. Instead, he portrayed the social set, where he poked fun at high society characters and their idiosyncrasies. And it wasn't until World War I that his drawings became political again. There were two drawings that made him decide not to go in that direction. The one was a drawing of President Garfield in bed. Half of his body is black. There's several doctors around him, and the commented, "This is the first case of fair trade fever, and it's likely to be deadly." And about 2 weeks later, he ended up at a dinner party where Garfield was the featured guest. Another one was they poked fun at an author that was very popular at the time that had turned one of the works into a play, and the cartoon showed people outside the theater with magnifying glasses looking for a plot. And that was another kind of embarrassment. He lucked out because in both cases, they either hadn't read or were too polite to comment. So he didn't. He decided that he had 2 close calls. It was time to stop. And the last picture on the front page is kind of his mentor in a way. It was George du Maurier, who was a British illustrator who had done a lot of work for Punch magazine in England. And so he studied his work, and eventually, a few years later, was able to meet him, and that's his drawing of du Maurier. Okay, the next couple of drawings are his kind of take on snobs and social climbers. And that kind of showed in his cartoons. And a frequent target was what he called the Anglomaniacs. And the recently wealthy members of society who were parading their daughters through Europe in hopes that they would marry nobility. And the one at the top is the caption reads, "Girls, girls, don't press his grace. He can only take one of you. And with him, it's purely a matter of business." And then the one at the bottom is that delicious moment when you meet the nobleman your daughter has captured in Europe. And you could see the kind of old, bent over old man is the nobleman, and the father's reaction, to him. When he developed a following and became financially secure, he took time to study in Paris, and the improvement in his technique became apparent. And the highlight of that trip was the ability to do the portrait of his mentor. He loved to draw people in casual conversations, and just kind of without them realizing he was drawing them. And the next two are pictures that of things that he drew in Paris. Just sitting in a cafe looking at people. And it took me a long time to figure out how he could keep up with his commitments, to the two magazines and still find time to travel and so forth. And it was because he just took his sketchbook with him everywhere, and would just sit down, whether it was in a hotel lobby or whatever, and draw the people that he saw that were kind of interesting to him. Eventually, with Life magazine, the editor just let him have free rein, but they would get together once a week, and he might kind of give him suggestions. And he would submit a portfolio of maybe 50 different drawings, and then they decide which one to use. Let's see, the invention of photomechanical engraving produced dependable facsimiles, which worked in his favor, because prior to that, you were dependent on whoever was reproducing your artwork. And before long, his work was everywhere. He had magazines, books, and advertisements featuring his artwork, and as his popularity grew, he became a reluctant member of the society that he was mocking. I mean, that worked because it gave him more material. Okay, his advertising revenue, and I'm not sure whether we got these in the right order or not, but if there should be one that shows ad for Colorado. Scribner's magazine used his images to spruce up ads, which was unusual at that time. And he ended up getting quite a following, because every magazine, a lot of newspapers and so forth had his ads in it. And prior to that, they didn't have pictures. So the Summer Pleasures in Colorado is an example of his first ad that he sold to the Chicago and Burlington Railroad. I mentioned The Prisoner of Zenda that I bought that didn't have any illustrations in it. The picture up at the right-hand corner is the illustration that should have been in the book that I bought that wasn't for some reason. But that was the cover for The Prisoner of Zenda. And down at the bottom is really out of context, but that's when he first started drawing political ads again, and that was during World War I. And it's Uncle Sam. He was famous for his Uncle Sams. They thought he was the best Uncle Sam artist at the time. And he is defending France from the oppressor Germany. And, again, it sends a message. He was well known for his random sketches of everyday people, and that's the page that should be have the first quarrel at the top. The one next to that is Pillsbury. Maybe I'm out of. Pillsbury doesn't like social settings, but his wife won't come without him. And so it shows. And then the other one that I really liked is a little tale of a sleeve. He was mocking the great big mutton sleeves. And so you have the couple that got busted by the butler or whatever, canoozling on the couch. And the other little pictures in that are sketches that he took from the Columbian exhibition. And he loved he went twice. He loved that. His work was displayed in the Liberal Arts Building, and it was well received, but he liked the anonymity of being there, because he could wander around and he could just sketch random people. And he would keep these sketches and introduce those into future cartoons. Okay, those experiences really only increased his popularity. He was a very eligible bachelor. He was tall, good-looking, athletic, well-mannered. He knew how to behave in society. So he had a lot of women kind of chasing after him. And to his credit, he was so focused on his work that he really didn't get caught up. And it was interesting. At one point, one of the New York newspapers did an expose of artists and how they treated their models when they were, they were basically after sex. And so they sent like 3 models to his studio who came on to him relentlessly, and he was not interested. He had a lot of respect for his models. He paid them well. If they drawing only took a half a day, he would pay them for the full day's wages. And so when his art started being sold, a lot of his models were his very first patrons. He married Irene Langhorne in 1893. She came from a prominent Southern family. Her sister Nancy was married to Waldorf Astor, who was an American-born Englishman. After her husband succeeded to his father's peerage and entered the House of Lords, she won his seat in the House of Commons. And she was the first woman to serve in Parliament. And that kind of gave him connection to his trips from London and London society as well. Langhorne's sisters were said to be very attractive. They were a living, breathing version of the Gibson Girl. And one of the sources incorrectly cited the fact that Irene was the inspiration for the Gibson Girl. But that's not true, because she was created in 1890, and they didn't get married until 1893. It's kind of a funny story. He was in Chicago for the Columbian exhibition. He had 3 women on the string, and he decided that it's time for him to get married. And he wanted to make sure he made a good decision. So on his way back to New York, he visited all 3. And finally, Irene was the one that won out. Her father had been a Civil War general for the Confederacy. He was a true Southern gentleman. One of his criteria for deciding who was going to marry his daughter was how well he rode a horse. And luckily, so the first thing he did when he got there is they suited up a horse and they went out for a ride. And he was impressed. He knew how to ride. And the horse came back, not overworked, well rested. And one of the cartoons that and I don't think he drew it, but it was to illustrate that story. There's 2 horses kind of in this corner tied up to a fence, and a man and a woman sitting on a hillside looking out over the landscape. And the one horse is saying to the other, "This is the 3rd trip this week. Do you think he thinks something will happen this time?" Which again kind of shows his sense of humor. The Gibson Girl was a personification of physical attractiveness. during a 20-year period beginning in 1890. He saw his creation, and this is a quote, representing the composite of thousands of American girls. She combined elements of female beauty, such as the fragile lady and the voluptuous woman. Large busts and hips were not depicted as vulgar or lewd. She was tall and slender with ample bosom, hips, and buttocks. She had an exaggerated S-curve torso shaped by wearing a swanbill corset. Her neck was thin, her hair was piled high on her head in the contemporary bouffant. She was stylish and at ease. And she was really the personification of the new upper middle class society. She had the confidence to be impeccably dressed, and in the latest fashionable attire. She was seen cycling through Central Park. Again, something that wouldn't have been allowed prior to that. She could enter the workplace. She could attend college and search for a husband, which was portrayed as her most valuable job. Many of the illustrations feature a Cupid at the side, and you can see at the page with the Gibson Girls on it, down at the bottom is a Cupid sitting in the, and the cartoon next to it shows, it's a golf game. It's kind of hard to make out, but the Cupid is in the forefront holding some golf clubs. And the caption is, "Golf is not the only game on earth." You know, in that society, you met your mate. I mean, it was kind of like a job. And the social season in the summer was to go to Nantucket or along the coast. And there were parties and so forth. And the women were trying to find an eligible man. And the man was trying to find, hopefully, a woman whose husband owned a business so he could create a business opportunity for himself. And the one above that, his vacation over, kind of is a, you know, kind of a ode to that or whatever. He did his work. We don't know whether it's going to work out or not, but, you know, he met had his introduction. And ironically, that was how, you know, he eventually met Irene, or almost met her. It was a near miss. But she had heard about him through friends and convinced her parents to let her to go to New York. And when she was in New York, she got caught up in that New York society, and they met again. She'd never be a suffragette. Taking place in the suffrage movement was more likely to be the new woman, which was another cultural image at the time. She was an edgier version, advocating for disruption of the old social order through equal rights, sexual freedom, and suffrage. The Gibson Girl was depicted as an equal and sometimes teasing companion to men, yet she was comfortable in her role. Men were often depicted as simpletons or bumblers, yet they were portrayed sympathetically. He illustrated them to be so captivated by her looks that they would follow her anywhere, attempting to fill her every desire. And the big illustration on the next page is a good example. I absolutely love that. Love in a garden. You know, she's determined that that tree is going to be planted upside down. And the men are kind of, you know, amazed by that. But if that's what he wanted, or that's what she wanted, they would do it. Another famous caption for one of his illustrations is a man and a woman, and he's saying, "Will you share my lot, Penelope?" And her response is, "Yes, if there's a brownstone in front of it." So even though, you know, he's not really pushing the suffrage movement, he's giving women a lot of power. And he's doing it in a way that's not totally disruptive to society. Mimicry on a national scale is an accepted part of life in America. Fashion, household goods, and toys are churned out with every major motion picture. The Illustrator once performed that role in the Gibson Girl, and that's why I have. The Gibson Girl was the very first image to be marketed. And I was looking for something authentic, and because a lot of the things that I found on eBay was from Victorian Marketplace or something. They were reproductions. But this is an actual advertising mug from Buffalo, New York from 1912. And it was advertising for a market chain or a chain of stores. To think that we've all gone beyond that this is the marketing for 100 years later. This is Downton Abbey, Lady Violet, and this is kind of the 2012 version of the Gibson Girl on a mug. She was on everything. She was on saucers, teacups, teapots, spoons. I mean, you know, just everywhere. He talked at one point about being just kind of nonplussed because he went to a dinner party and he was eating off of Gibson Girl plates with a Gibson Girl fork and kind of wondering how this happened. Another illustration of just how crazy it got. You know, you can pass this around. This is something else I found. eBay loves me when I give one of these talks. One of the things was even wallpaper with the Gibson Girl's image on it that was designed to sell to bachelors and for their bedrooms. And I don't know what to say about that, but anyway, this is a reproduction for Dollhouse. You know, if you were doing a dollhouse and wanted a Gibson room, you could buy that. Again, just to think that we haven't gone that far away from that, I brought another illustration. This is the fabric that was created for Downton Abbey, and the patterns. You could even make yourself a Downton clutch to carry with you on formal occasions. So, you know, we're still, you know, and I like to think I never really kind of bought into that with my son. I didn't dress him up, but who was the first one to go out and buy Downton fabric? You know, so I confess, you know, we're not immune. Okay. The Gibson man was created in the image of his father. He was clean-shaven with dashing sideburns because the elder Mr. Gibson believed that no man with hair on his face should be allowed to kiss a child. Clean-shaven men in his illustrations caused beards to go out of style. And if you notice, you know, pictures and so forth from that time, the men are beardless. His technique in pen and ink drawing was characterized by bold lines, strong contrast, and ability to create a range of values and textures with simple lines. His skill at rendering faces, and I think that's what so took me, you know, got me involved with the one upstairs, is the faces on the people. Many of his illustrations were presented as vignettes, and a lot of them are kind of, there's like an open background which kind of draws you in and gets you to wonder what's coming next. And so a lot of his single drawings ended up being serialized. And a perfect example of that is another one of my favorite characters, Mr. Pip. Americans were traveling to Europe in droves at the time. He was working in Germany on a commission for Scribners, and he found the perfect model for Mr. Pip. He just kind of stumbled into his studio one day. He said he personified the downtrodden. It was evident that his wife had sent him out to find work. And he kind of stumbled in offering to be or wanting to be paid to be a model. He wasn't overly attractive. He wasn't relating to anything he was working on at the time, but he was so taken with him that As he said, he seemed to be the composite of 1,000 henpecked husbands. He felt he couldn't turn him down, so he drew him, and he first appeared in the September 8th, 1898 issue of Life. People loved Mr. Pip, and they kept asking for more. So he started the series, The Education of Mr. Pip, as his wife and 2 daughters drug him through London, Paris, Rome, and Monte Carlo. Mr. Pip became the main character in a play in 1905 that was later turned into a motion picture. And let's see, Before Leaving Paris, the one at the top, Before Leaving Paris, Mr. Pip, at the suggestion of his daughters, make a few purchases. And then the other one is down at the bottom. They were successful. Both of his daughters ended up getting married. The one found her nobleman. The other one came back to the United States and ended up working for one of his managers or whatever of his business. And the one at the top is in Paris, he had the opportunity of enlarging his horizon and enveloping an interest in the real purpose of the trip. And so, you know, he has quite a few adventures. And one of the books that I ordered, it was another one of the reproductions, was about Mr. Pip, but it got lost in the mail somehow. So he contributed. By the outbreak of World War I, the Gibson Girl was beginning to fall out of favor. Women preferred more practical clothing, and the war caused her to take a more active role in society. He continued to work as a book illustrator and published collections of his own work, and that's what kind of kept him going. In 1918, he became the editor of Life, which he later purchased. He was elected to the National Academy of Design as an associate member in 1918, becoming a full academician in 1932. He turned to oil painting for a brief time in 1905, but he returned to illustration. He always wanted to be a painter. I think that was always his ambition. But he was making so much money that he couldn't, give the other up. He really struggled as the editor of the leader of Life. In 1932, he sold his interests and retired to a property in Maine. The property had been his retreat throughout the struggles with life, and he built a compound, and a lot of it with his own 2 hands. He had his kids, they had houses, his family. He had a little chapel. And again, he did a lot of the carpentry work on his own. Without having to prove himself, he started painting again. And I couldn't find a good copy of any of his paintings. They were rare. The Academy of Arts and Letters encouraged him to hold a one-man show in 1934. It began with his earlier illustrations for Life and ended with his more recent paintings. And the exhibit was very well received. Critic for the New York Times wrote, make no mistake about it, Charles Gibson is a painter. So he went full circle. He continued publishing his drawings in book form. They were widely popular, especially Mr. Pip. And Critic and the Artist made the following observation: a man must be born with a very unusual combination of qualities to succeed as a social satirist. He must have a strong analytical powers, the lightest touch and expression, must bubble over with humor that's always kindly without being moralist, must detest sham and vulgarity, and must know the societies he satirizes well, and wisely enough neither to be out of sympathy with it nor to be infatuated. And he made the comment that part of the reason for his success is that the people that would have been offended weren't reading, Life magazine or paying any attention. And even everybody if they really had a sense of humor, could see themselves. You know, the men realized that maybe they had that position because they married well and so forth, and it was kind of funny. So that's basically the story of his life. To talk a little bit about the drawing that we have, and I asked Jennifer for information about this, and all she could find was it's an untitled illustration, group of 5 figures around a table, Spot the Englishman, from a periodical, so it was probably published in Life, in 1908 by Charles Dana Gibson. It's signed in the lower corner. And this would have come from the time that he was starting to do gallery shows and signing and selling his work. And as far as why Robert purchased it, who knows? We'll never know. I think that he was probably intrigued because of the story it told, that it was an illustration of the time, and the changing mores and so forth. If you've seen the new Downton Abbey movie, that really speaks to that, how things that were forbidden, you know, when the series started are now starting to become acceptable. And this would speak to that time. The Englishman at the back is obviously appalled by these rude Americans. And it's kind of funny. I mean, they're engaged in conversations. Never would have had men and women at the same table prior to that. And it shows, like I say, in a subtle way, the fact that I think he really appreciated women. And any questions?